Bentley here. Good evening to you. On behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I welcome you to A Climate of Change, the Hub's livecast exploring with thought leaders from across North America what these wildly unprecedented times mean for addressing the climate crisis here in Alberta and how to create the fair, fast, and impactful change we need. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Yaqsi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I'd like to also make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our nieces and nephews and grandchildren, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. I want to quickly thank our sponsors for making tonight's show happen: Skyfire Energy, Go Electric, Solar Homes Incorporate, and new sponsor, Greengate Energy. A little bit more about them later on. But on to the show. So for our next author, Chris Turner, for some time I have been telling anybody that really wants to understand the province of Alberta, his book, The Patch, is required reading. You just need to have that book if you want to understand all that. And what I want to say about his latest book, How to Be a Climate Optimist, Blueprints for a Better World, is he's done it again. And what I mean by that is I live a 50-50 existence. There's 50% of the time where I feel like, we're probably just going to turn this whole thing into an ashtray, a burning, smoldering ashtray. But then there's 50% of the time where I feel like, no, you know what, we've got this. And the technology is advancing. And think about how much things have changed in just 5 years, let alone 10, 15. And what I would say is that if you're either chock full of hope or full of anxiety, or like me, a mixture of both, you need to read How to Be a Climate Optimist by Chris Turner. So don't walk, run to your local bookstore, but catch the show first. So Chris Turner, Climate Optimist, welcome to A Climate of Change.
Well, hello, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the generous intro. I appreciate it.
You betcha, you betcha. Okay, so I'm going to address first what I consider to be the elephant in the room about this book. And I know it as the elephant in the room because I confront this elephant routinely. And I'll give it to you in the form that I receive it, which is, climate optimist, oil companies making more money than ever, creating more emissions than ever. We're going to blow right through our goal of 1.5 degrees by 2030. Optimist? Are you nuts? What do you say, Chris, to that?
I would say that's a totally fair question or response to what I've written, for sure. What I would say is that there is definitely a core of truth to that feeling, which is that no matter how extraordinary the next 10, 15, 20 years are for the global energy transition, for climate solutions that I talk about in the book, we are in for some very, very rough sailing. And we've already made a lot of the mistakes that are going to guarantee that. What I would say, though, is that what I have seen, now having spent about 20 years kind of covering this, and particularly in the last 5 or so, is you can feel the whole thing's really starting to...
over at 8 o'clock, honey.
Really starting to shift on its axis. Someone's got their mic still on there.
Yeah, it looks like Karen, if I could just get you to mute yourself. Thanks.
The whole thing is starting to pivot in an extraordinary way. And I feel strongly that, and really the motivation behind the book was to make the case, we are going to see a rapid acceleration in our ability to take this problem on and really begin to confront it and solve it. That doesn't mean it goes entirely away. That doesn't mean necessarily we stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius, but we've already wiped a lot of the worst case scenarios off the table. We are really, really, I think, driving hard now to keeping below 2 degrees Celsius. How far below depends a lot on how we all react. And part of the reason why I think the optimistic side of us needs this encouragement and needs this sort of sense of community is because that's the thing that's going to get us there, is understanding that we are going to build a better world. And it won't be perfect, and it will not be free from climate chaos. But we are really making progress. And I wouldn't have written the book if 20 years on I looked at the thing and said, no, just not there. But we really are. Every day is another extraordinary day on the climate solutions beat.
Yeah, one of the things that, like I say, this book really speaks to me, and I've been making some of these arguments for some time. And what this book really addresses is the inevitability of all of this, and we're really seeing that now here in 2023, as opposed to you've been cataloging all of these increments for 20 years now, but you must marvel at how much change has gone on from 2019 to 2023 with COVID and with all these other things, just sort of between that and the climate disasters becoming more frequent, but then renewables becoming much cheaper. The changes seems to be happening really, really fast now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that's sort of the kind of engine of the optimism there, is that this thing is getting stronger and building in waves. And in the book, I give all kinds of examples. Often when I'm asked to give my one single example, I like to point at the fact that solar power is now the darling of the International Energy Agency, the IEA, which until very recently thought it would eventually hit some sort of absolute cap and fall off because solar simply couldn't become one of the primary electricity sources of our future. They now freely acknowledge and encourage the fact that that's happening. But one of the other things that I thought was pretty, this is something that's happened since the start of the pandemic, quite recently, since the book came out even, is or I guess right around the time the book was coming out, is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that was an interesting moment to see how does the world's leadership and business leaders and opinion makers, all the people who create this sort of sense of inevitability around the energy transition, how do they react? And I can remember in those first very nervous weeks that there was a lot of time, this is where we find out that in fact this thing is not ready for prime time, that Western Europe's need for Russian natural gas is so fundamental and deep that we are going to see them kind of cave under the weight of Russian oil and gas industry, which in essence is the Russian state. And the opposite's happened, which is not to say that they aren't still using Russian natural gas in Europe. It's that all of those countries that were seemingly so vulnerable are accelerating their own commitments to clean energy, accelerating their own commitments to getting off of natural gas, and finding that the tools are there. And that's the really important part. I mean, even 5 years earlier, would readily available, cheap heat pumps that work in cold climates have been there for them to pick up and use? No. That's something we've done in the last 5-10 years that has made the toolkit available. And then I thought that was a great litmus, because I could even see people who whose opinions I follow who were like, oh shoot, this might be a big, a big stumbling block to where we thought we were heading. And I think the opposite's happened. I think it's in a silver lining on a very dark cloud kind of way, improve the position of clean energy, in this case, adding this added sense of, well, it's also a liberating force. It's also a way to free yourself from dependency on an autocratic regime that thinks that it can use it as a tool or as a cudgel. It's
fascinating. And I wonder about how big, when we look at the energy transition story, COVID has a place in there, and now Russia, Ukraine absolutely has a place in there. And I wonder how big they are compared to one another. But, what was interesting with the Russia, Ukraine thing is a lot of the same voices here in Canada were like, we want to defeat the Russian bear. We need pipelines. We need lots of pipelines. We need to beat them on oil. And it may turn out that the way you beat a petrostate, which is sometimes described as just a heavily armed gas station, is to transfer away from the substance that is their prime product. Is that what do you see?
Certainly. I mean, I think it highlighted that aspect of the energy transition. To come back to the inevitability, the great thing that's happening now is that a lot of these, the climate solution tools, as I call them in the book, are making their own case regardless. I mean, no matter what your opinion, one of my favorite cases in point is that as we speak, both Southern Alberta and South Vietnam are heartlands for renewable energy development. And the reason that came about was not because either of those places had any particular moment of realization that they needed to get off of fossil fuels or decarbonize their grids. It's because the business case in both cases, in two extraordinarily different economic environment. It's a developing country with a sort of still half, well, still mostly ruling communist state, and then Southern Alberta, which sees itself as a sort of free market champion. Both of those now see things like solar panels as the way forward for energy, and that's this huge shift that I talk about in the book as really being that an engine behind this inevitability, this momentum that is just knocking over one hurdle after another. Lots of stuff that people have been telling me for years was going to be. This is when we'll really realize that this stuff you're talking about is just fringe. It's just hype. It's just subsidy, and the opposites happened again and again. And that's really, I mean, as I said, like the optimism comes from the fact that I just keep seeing these things that people told me could never happen happening.
Yeah. So we had a very interesting beginning to 2023 here in Alberta, specifically as it relates to the upcoming election. And I'll state from the outset that we're a nonpartisan organization and we don't throw rocks at any particular political party, whether we want to or not. But it is interesting that, in the early days of 2023, a lot of the election talk was around climate things like a just transition. And now we're finding that 15-minute cities is something that conspiracy theorists have found a way to fearmonger about. But to me, I want to see how your climate optimist gauges this. For me, I feel like, hey, we're talking about a just transition in a 15-minute city. We don't often, in my experience, stuff doesn't get talked about enough. And my guess is that here in Canada and specifically in Alberta, a lot more people know what a just transition is, and a lot more people know what a 15-minute city is now than they did in December. What is there reason to be hopeful around things like conspiracy mongering around 15-minute cities?
Yeah, I would say for sure, not just for the reasons you just cited, that those things are now big items on the agenda. Yeah, but also the pushback on them is so weak. Right. And I think that's one of those things we lose sight of, particularly if you've been at this a long time and you're used to one step forward, two steps back, and changes in government, meaning that a whole bunch of good things get thrown aside or whatever else. There tends to be this reaction. Oh no, this is how they're gonna beat us. They're not winning. Those are rear guard stances, and you see that. I mean, this is something I specifically talk about in the book. But like when we look at net zero pledges, and people can look at an oil and gas company saying we're going to get to net zero, and cast all of the understandable skepticism they want at it. The fact that they have to play at it is a win. Yeah, that's all momentum in the right direction. There is, and I think that's really what we're no longer talking about. Like, is this something we're going to do anything about? We're now quibbling over how fast and who pays and where we're going to get to, how big a change it's going to be. And a lot of this is just people reacting to change as we often do, with a certain amount of hesitancy or even anger, and lashing out in the only way they can. And they're not finding weaknesses in the fundamentals of the idea. And that's why you wind up getting something like the 15-minute city thing, where you have, a certain faction of the right wing in a number of countries arguing against the idea of a nice neighborhood. Which you go ahead and you stake that terrain and you argue to people as much as you want that they shouldn't have nice neighborhoods, and we'll see who wins that one.
Right. Well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to pitch our podcast, The Climate Lens. We just recently interviewed a few Alberta climate scientists, friend of the show, James Byrne, and new friend, Hester Yiskut. And we talked about the 15-minute city conspiracy theory and how that relates to the history of climate denialism. And climate denial was a big force that held us back for a long time and really, really slowed us down. And you compare that to 15-minute cities, like you have to take a creative leap. You have to accept the proponents of the conspiracy theories in enormous imaginary leap that we're going to go from, making life convenient for you in your communities to locking you into some kind of concentration camp or whatever the latest flavor of it is. Mm-hmm. So it does make a real difference. And it was interesting to hear a few climate scientists talk about it as well. The other thing that has been in the news is, there's talk of $20 billion. I mean, it starts out being $100 million for a pilot program, and if it gets accepted, it's supposed to be $20 billion for the oil companies to clean up their orphaned oil wells. And I mean, I guess my question to you might be one of the most important questions that I can ask, which is, if we had $20 billion to spend on the energy transition, what should Alberta be spending our money on?
I mean, there are someone better than me in economics would have to, off the top of my head, I say a high-speed rail link between Edmonton and Calgary. But because we're already doing the other, we're already decarbonizing the grid. We're already doing some other good infrastructure stuff. Moving to an urban landscape that can better facilitate life without getting in a car every day is a good thing. And that's not to say there shouldn't be cars. That's to say it's absurd that we can't get in a train to Edmonton in a city in a part of the country that was built by rail and planned around rail lines. So yeah, that was just off the top of my head. If I thought more about it, I know, well, programmatically we should do this and this, but like off the top of it, what would be a ridiculous, like the biggest reason why there isn't, well, there's also right of ways and things like that, but like the biggest obstacle to anyone in North America doing a lot more, even if it's not super high speed rail, even if they don't go all the way to what they've done in Spain or France or Japan, is that upfront cost. As soon as you commit, you're putting your name as a politician or as a political party next to a really large number for a thing that's unfamiliar to a lot of people and that they're going to be scared about and think is going to be a waste of money. No one's ever pulled up high-speed rail lines once they've laid them. They're incredibly popular. They're game-changing economically. They would fundamentally alter the sort of regional economics of that corridor from here to Edmonton. It would be a huge thing. So there you go. Off the top of my head, give me $20 billion and we can build a high-speed rail link that gets you to downtown Edmonton in an hour and a half.
That works for me. That I'm down with that. I saw a funny meme on the internet where they were showing rail line through Europe, and it's just this crisscross, and you can barely even see the underlying country. And then they show North America, and it's like, like this, and it's just like, wow, it's an enormous difference. And we do have a part of the history of this country is building rail across country. Mm-hmm. Do you hear? Is there any? What do you think the possibility is of Canada one day having high-speed light rail from coast to coast?
Not light rail, high speed. I don't know that you'd ever. Coast to coast is tough. Getting past the thing, and it's interesting because it parallels the history, which I'm a rail buff, so I've read all the Pierre Burton and everything else on this. The hardest part of the Transcontinental Railroad to build was not through the mountains, although that's the most dramatic. It's Winnipeg across the Canadian Shield to Southern Ontario. And that's how anyone who's driven it knows it's a lot of empty, rugged terrain that's very hard to rail on. It's very expensive. The population density is extraordinarily low. That part of it, I mean, basically if I'm to back it up, someone somewhere is eventually, hopefully in North America, going to actually build one. California's doing it. It's getting messy because doing infrastructure projects in the US these days is messy. But if you finally ever get San Francisco to LA or DC to Washington or something like that, it's a very sticky concept. It's like solar panels on your neighbor's roof. People will hear about it and want to get a piece of it. But someone's got to take that first leap so that the next jurisdiction, which would be, for example, Toronto to Montreal or Calgary. I mean, Calgary to Edmonton makes as much sense as Toronto to Montreal. It's not as much population, but it's a much shorter distance, and it's at that really real sweet spot. Like when Spain built out high speed rail, the real sweet, basically where whatever it cost, the Spanish people kind of embraced it wholesale, was when they finished the Madrid to Barcelona line, which basically erased air traffic between the two cities overnight. Because nobody would rather get on a plane than get on a train once they've done it in roughly the same time frame. So yeah, I think it's that first step. Now, the thing that I'm kind of finding myself surprised to be encouraged by, the big thing that needs to happen for Alberta is that people need to get used to the idea that trains are things you can take usefully again. And so this proposal, even though it would not be my idea of a first step, but this idea of going from the Calgary airport to downtown to Banff, which actually looks like it could happen, would be maybe not a bad catalyst to reopen the conversation about rail between Calgary and.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Speaking about elections and Alberta and $20 billion and all that, with all of the things that you've seen over the last 20 years, and I should just mention for our audience who might not have read the book yet, and you should, Chris really, not only does he lay out the solutions that are at play, he's spent the last couple of decades going and checking out these solutions and talking to the people behind them. And the book really lays out that story as well. So, with your depth of experience of seeing the solutions that are going on, are there some things, like here in Alberta, we end up seeing ourselves as an oil and gas energy folk. How do we as a province seize the opportunity, the energy transition? What can we do to become real leaders and have the same kind of prosperity that we, if not exactly the same, something that we're able to, the whole premise of the book, which I agree with, is it's we're moving to something better, not a sacrifice. So what is that better for a former oil and gas dominated economy like ours?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a process already underway. You already see, I mean, I wasn't put up to saying this, but your new sponsor, Green Gate Energy,
right,
is a company started here in Calgary by someone who thought, you know what, we have really great renewable energy resources, and we've got a decentralized or deregulated grid that's very easy to connect to, and I'm going to just start cutting deals, and and if no one gets in my way, I'll keep cutting more and more. And now they're building the largest solar farms in Canada and on the prairie. So
yeah,
I would say we're already part of that conversation. Understandably, there is a lag between what's happening and what we think, how we perceive what's happening. So the oil and gas sector and the historic relationship with oil and gas and all of the politics involved in it still dominates the conversation for a lot of reasons. But on the ground, Alberta is very much a part. Calgary's got a very strong and burgeoning clean tech sector. There are interesting companies. There's one that I follow really closely called Ever Technologies that thinks they've maybe cracked one of the most tricky parts of the whole renewable energy landscape, which is cheap geothermal. Whether they do it or not, that's a Calgary company started by some guys out of the oil patch who were looking at ways to make abandoned wells profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at the various things you could do with empty reservoirs and pipes and things like that, and now find themselves as a very, very well financed, internationally bidding geothermal company. So yeah, it's not what could we do? We're already doing it. And then we're also not, the other thing is, like, as much as we think of Calgary as an oil and gas town, Alberta as an oil and gas province, we're still, Canadian cities that have reasonably good, infrastructure to build on. We're not, you compare to, it's an easy win, but compared to an American city of similar size and age in the Western United States, we already have really, really good transit. We've got a decent and expanding cycling network. We've got reasonably progressive citizenry that are willing to back stuff that makes sense, even if it isn't perfectly in keeping with the sort of oil and gas sort of cultural self-image or whatever else. So I would say that all the tools are still here, already here. Some of them we're already using. I don't look at all at and the other thing I would say is the oil and gas sector, for all of its historic frictions with this energy transition, large parts of it are increasingly not all that fractious in that they understand the changing energy landscape as well as anyone. They also have drawn an extraordinarily talented workforce who are good at doing things other than just oil and gas. So like a lot of the tools are just ready and waiting.
Yeah. Something that I've mentioned quite a few times since I witnessed it with my own eyes in November, and it's a piece of climate optimism that I can pass on to you. Maybe you were at this event as well, but I attended the Calgary Economic Development's Economic Outlook event, which is something they do every year. And my big takeaway, Chris, was every speaker that I got up there, and for our audience, the audience of that event it's a very, very business minded audience. Everybody's there with their business card. It's a networking opportunity, and you're hearing from Calgary Economic Development about what to expect in this year in 2023. And of all the speakers that were up there, every one of them used the phrase energy transition. And every one of them used the phrase energy transition not as some boogeyman, not as something to scare you about, something to be positive and excited about. And so to me, I felt like getting up on top of a table and going, welcome to the party, here we are. Yeah. But what's interesting to me is as I watch the election unfold, energy transition is still, nobody's talking about that at all. It doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you're on. I'm not hearing energy transition. And Calgary is supposed to be a battleground state. Do you think political groups are missing the boat by not addressing the energy transition? Given it's becoming something that all of us are more used to understanding and accepting.
Yeah, I think probably more than that they don't. I mean, that it isn't a political issue, is that it's recognized in Alberta, and this may be something that's beginning to kind of fade, but certainly still lingers as a really difficult political landmine to navigate.
Yeah.
And if you're, in a very close election fight and you're a few months from a vote, you don't want to actually accidentally step on anything. So let's just leave that aside for now. Let's not wind up having to try and defend the federal government's maybe poor choice of words on X or Y thing that they want to do on the energy transition. Let's just, leave that aside for now. I don't think that means that it isn't actually an issue. I don't think that it means that either of the two leading parties intend to ignore it in power. I think what it means is that they know it's heavily freighted with some stuff they don't want to carry right now, and that's fine. Again, it's I think the inevitability around the thing is such that it doesn't need champions the way it did 5 or 10 years ago in quite the same way. You don't have to. I mean, I think it would be nicer if they did brag a little bit more about the fact that Alberta is now Canada's leading jurisdiction by far for renewable energy development. That'd be if it was me, I'd stand up and say that's a great thing. But I think they recognize there are parts of the economy, certain parts of the province where that maybe could cause some friction that they just don't want to deal with. And I think we politics has, in some necessary ways and some necessary ways, really dominated the whole climate solution conversation. And this is something I do get into in the book, to the point where if you're new to the conversation, if you got involved on the sort of activist regulatory side, it's a very bleak looking conversation. Yeah. But politics is not leading this. Governments aren't leading this. Policy isn't. I mean, yes, there have been some important policies. There have been breakthrough governments that have done X and Y. But when you look at the sum total of things that have happened, it has not been because, a UN climate conference or anything else came to a decision and acted. It's because, things happened piecemeal here and there that catalyzed certain kinds of innovation and certain kinds of transformation that are now becoming the part of this inevitable shift. And I think we pay way too close attention. I mean, here's a shorthand to try and summarize what I'm saying. I mean, you could look at the emissions profile of Germany, which is a country that I talk about a lot, and say they really haven't done that much yet on climate, have they? I mean, there's still a significant amount of fossil fuel in their grid. It's still a very car-dominated culture in a lot of ways. People still drive a lot of places. But what Germany did, for a variety of reasons we can get into if you want, is catalyze the global solar industry to the point where solar is now cheap and ubiquitous everywhere.
Right.
And that so outweighs anything they could have done domestically. Which is not to discount any one country's or any one region's current emissions profile. It's how important it is to have been part of building this now inevitable momentum that is making everyone's political conversation easier. It's way easier to make a case for renewables in Alberta when it's already profitable to attach them to the grid.
Right.
Ask your friends at Greengate about that.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, so you're talking about the role that Germany played, and then China came in and brought solar down in costs to where it is today by the enormous investment that they had. And then we have Biden last summer has put out the most ambitious climate plan out of America yet. Do you expect to see, that will accelerate yet again the cheapness and the uptake of renewables? And what's the opportunity / risk for Canada in the face of that?
I mean, the opportunity is Canada has extraordinarily good renewable energy resources. We have extraordinarily good resources in terms of raw materials. Talk to anyone at Natural Resources Canada who's been working on this for years, and I work with some of them from time to time, and they've been very well aware for a long time that the building blocks of a renewable energy transition are extraordinarily good for a whole bunch of Canadian resource industries. We can argue over there's still an environmental footprint, even if there's not a climate footprint to some of that, and that's a thing we can certainly discuss. But the business opportunity is massive, and the industries that are connected to that are extraordinarily well aware of it now. So I mean, there's the opportunity. I think the important thing that hopefully, the biggest risk, I guess, is that for some combination of weird domestic political reasons, we made a bunch of stupid decisions and didn't take full advantage of this, because it's going to happen anyway. But I mean, really, even that seems. I mean, this is kind of an easy example, but the Trump White House was not able to derail the energy transition in the United States.
No,
they continued to be one of the leading countries in rolling out renewable energy technologies, developing electric vehicles, all this other stuff, despite the fact that there was a blowhard in the White House who thought that coal was the future. And I think that's the world we live in now, much more so than. And I think you don't hear that as much in some kind of climate advocacy circles, because we saw though. I mean, I lived the first decade or so of the time I was covering this. I lived the world of constant delay and a government getting a little breakthrough and then someone coming in and reversing it, or a bit of success that had a blowback that wound up the renewable energy in Ontario is the great example of a really good idea that got rolled out in such a way that it led to a 10-year lag now in their ability to continue on in their success for a whole bunch of reasons that we could talk for the rest of the night on. That's the concern, but I think it's waning. I just don't. I mean, the pace and scale of where we're heading now is too big to ignore, and makes too much. And I mean, in a sense, to circle all the way back to your question about the Alberta elections this year, the one thing you don't hear anyone saying is that they want nothing to do with it.
Right.
No one's fear mongering around it. No one's saying, there's the trying to attach it, trying to attach certain kinds of things to the hated Liberal government. But it never digs down to the point of saying it's a bad idea to do this. All they do, I mean, in the case of the just transition, they dug a job figure out of a briefing note and tried to turn that into a fear tactic for a couple of news cycles. That's not the same as saying we're going to block it legislatively. We're going to renew our commitment to more gas and coal on the grid or whatever. And part of the reason for that, I mean, this happened, when we had the last change in government, the UCP ran on bringing coal back, and then, found out in power, if they hadn't already known, that none of the operators of the utilities wanted coal back. They had no allies in that fight. So
Trump had the same amount of success. It's amazing to watch. So, again, referring to the election stuff, what are the sorts of things that you would like to hear from folks, or is it such that we just understand that they're not going to talk about the stuff that we want to hear about because they got to be safe? What would you like to hear from the people asking for your vote?
I mean, I would love to hear that they're really, really keen on continuing to enhance urban sustainability and giving cities the tools that they need to do what they need to do to make cities more, walkable, livable, active transport, more investment in transit. I mean, unexpectedly, there's some not bad language out of the UCP budget today on transit investment and thinking about rail links with the airports and that sort of thing. So maybe that's just a further sign that we've, in some ways already kind of won the battle. I mean, I think you'd like, ideally to have a government that at least will stay out of the way. It would be great to have one that sort of it would be great. I mean, maybe this is more than asking what I'd like to hear out of a leader. It'd be great that if we, and I think we will get to a point where saying, among the things that are great about this province and the opportunity is that it's, Canada's renewable energy heartland. And that's something to be proud of, and we should double down on and look for new opportunities in. I mean, behind, at the ground level, that's happening anyway, which is, I guess, why I kind of think, well, if it doesn't wind up becoming a political football, that's fine. I mean, and so I guess I don't tend to look to the political conversation for leadership on this. They're a lagging indicator for the most part. Every now and then you get one who actually, I mean, even, and this is, I think, maybe to tie up this little part of the conversation, it is very, very instructive that the single biggest, by far, piece of federal climate legislation ever passed in the United States, ever even proposed in the United States, was passed under the name Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
They wanted to do what they wanted to do. They wanted to make huge investments in renewables and electric vehicles and all kinds of other great stuff. And they didn't want to vote. You have to bring it to a vote under the climate banner.
Yeah.
And ultimately the result is so good that I don't mind that was the process.
And that ties into the fact that Biden unleashes a huge climate plan, faces the electorate in November, and wins handily. And then, you look at Brazil.
It wasn't even an issue. I mean,
it wasn't even an issue, but if it were unpopular, it would have been an issue. They would have made it an issue. But then in Brazil and Australia, you had climate laggards, to say the least, defeated in elections. And how far away from you where it becomes a bellwether everywhere?
I mean, you could argue it already is in most places. Even like, I'm trying to think of places where, other than a handful, parts of Russia and the former Soviet Union, parts of the Middle East, where you don't have to at least be able to pay plausible lip service to it. The federal conservatives in Canada continue to not quite fully get that. They seem to kind of half get that they have to have a reasonable idea to put forward, but they don't yet seem to understand that it could be an opportunity because they've spent too long, fear mongering on it. But I mean, I think we're pretty close to that point already, where you, regardless, and again, if we kind of follow trends, not everything perfectly follows this way, but it does sometimes feel to me like I just basically watch everything that I was seeing happen in Europe 5 or 10 years ago play out, and I think, that was the next step. And you saw that flip in a lot of the European countries, where it just sort of vanished as a thing you could oppose. And by that I mean, like, not only that you needed to be broadly accept the climate change was a reality and needed real action, but that you couldn't even really fight on the idea that you were going to be moving toward a decarbonized world and you were going to look for investment opportunities around that. I mean, the last one I can remember in the European context, for example, was prior to coming to office, Angela Merkel's conservatives in Germany were still broadly against the energy transition. It was 2006 when they were, it was a long time ago now, and in climate action terms. And then got to power and realized that the thing was already bigger than they could stop without losing a lot of allies. And in their case, without having to also endorse nuclear power, which they didn't want to do for a variety of reasons that are very unique to Germany's environmental movement. But I think we're already, that's been one of the really encouraging signs in kind of the white noise in the background of all of this is just watching, we sort of started out talking a little bit like we're watching, one big industry after another just kind of give up whatever nominal opposition they had or indifference or whatever, and kind of and now sort of say, well, we're not sure what we're going to do about this, but we realize it's the world we're going to live in the next 20 years.
Chris Turner, Climate Optimist. We're just going to say a few words about some of the sponsors that help us keep the lights on, the electric powered lights on around here. I don't have electric powered lights yet, but I'd like to. So first up, I just want to mention Skyfire Energy. They're Western Canada's trusted solar provider since 2001. That's real leadership on solar for over 20 years now, right here in Alberta. Starting with the vision to bring the magic of solar power to the world for a stronger, healthier, and more sustainable global community. We also want to thank Solar Homes Incorporated. They're your net zero home renovations experts right here in Calgary, Alberta. Invest in your future, lower your emissions, renovate with return. Hit up their website at solarhomesinc.com and you can book a consultation today. Another sponsor we want to thank is Go Electric, who's your exclusive provider of used electric cars and plug-in hybrid vehicles for Calgary and beyond. If you'd like your next vehicle to be an electric car, but you're tired of waiting for the price to come down, why not consider a used EV? I encourage you to head down to their dealership and take one for a test drive. Your Calgary Climate Hub's co-chair did exactly that and ended up leaving an electric car that day, and she loves it. Finally, I want to thank our new sponsor, Greengate Power, who has successfully developed renewable energy projects of unprecedented scale in North America, just like Chris and I were talking about, specifically right here in Alberta. And they strive to continue to be leaders in transitioning to renewable and sustainable sources of energy. As technologies continue to advance at a phenomenal rate, Greengate Power is committed to offering more economic, environmentally sound, and reliable ways to continue to meet growing global energy needs. I should also mention, we just had our latest podcast episode drop. Our previous one had the most views or most listens, I guess you'd say, ever. Our newest one is called The New Alberta Denial, and you should check it out. A lot of the themes that Chris and I have been talking about tonight are on there. We talked with two bona fide Alberta climate scientists to help us wade our way through some of these concepts. The other thing I want to mention is the upcoming event, Navigating the Green Economy. It's a networking symposium, your chance to meet and mingle with leaders from across the spectrum of the green economy for networking, business insights, and hearing the insider perspective on finding success in this growing sector. That's at the Wilderness Society in Kensington. And boy, oh boy, I didn't write down the date, but it's middle of March. I want to say March 15. That's we'll put the right answers into the chat. But yeah, that's going to be a great event, an in-person event for the first time in quite a while. The only other thing I want to mention before we get back into the show is just that we are looking to grow our membership always, but specifically this month, we have a goal that we're trying to reach. And what I would say to you is if you are a climate optimist, or if you are, if climate is something that gives you anxiety, or if, like me, it can be both, you need a hub in your life. You need to sit around the table with smart people that care about the right things, that are actually working towards getting the thing done. And, with the phrase we use over and over again from Joan Baez, the folk singer, who says that the antidote to despair is action. And that's what the Calgary Climate Hub is all about. So consider becoming a member if you're not already. And we'd love to have you. We will put you to work in whatever capacity works for you, whatever your expertise is, whatever you want your expertise to be, whatever your schedule is. We'll find a way to make it so that you can help us help this city get to where it wants to be. Okay, so back to the show here, Chris. The question that I want to ask you before we go to our panelist is just the same question I got to ask world climate science leader Michael E. Mann, which is, as dark as these times can be and can seem, like it seems like there's a fascist thing that wants to rise, and there's all sorts of different reasons to feel like these are extremely dark times. Is it possible that when people look back, they will see this time as being part of not just an energy renaissance, but a capital R renaissance that the whole world it has changed on?
I think it's possible. I wouldn't want to be in the large scale global geopolitical prediction business. I think there are some really, really dark forces at
Yeah.
work right now. Change and cataclysm on the level that we are already experiencing, that we will experience more of, does often throw off political and social movements that are really, really not encouraging. That said, I, if I don't necessarily 100% feel this is definitely going to be a renaissance, I can see how it could be. When you look at the natural bias of a lot of the, sort of climate solution tools that I talk about, it is toward a whole bunch of other really good things: decentralization, greater equity, greater opportunity, more sort of vibrant and inclusive urban environments, all of these sorts of things. So I guess what probably the most honest way I could answer that is to say, I've spent the last 20 years looking at the leading edge of this transition we're on, and those are all really great places.
Yeah.
They're great exemplars of where we should want to go. So does the world look more and more like that the more and more these tools spread? I tend to I've my background's actually in my undergrad degrees in history, and I tend to take long views on things and say that, even the ages that we look back on in golden ages had a lot of problems. We just at some point decided, oh, that was the catalyst for all of this great stuff until we look at it. So even the Renaissance had its problems.
Yeah, of course.
We're still going to have our problems, but I do think there is, and probably if you expand out, if you think of an era that begins not with the energy transition, but begins with the communications revolution and all of that, which warts and all, but it has been this extraordinary wellspring of change and opportunity and ability to connect people and all of that coming together. Do we get to a much better place? I think we do. How much better? Whether it's enough that we look back 100 years, 200 years from now, when I'm long gone and say that was the Renaissance, I don't know. I'll make a book recommendation here, just because it occurs to me that that's kind of thematically running under. There's a sci-fi author by the name of Kim Stanley Robinson. You might know him. Has been writing climate sci-fi, cli-fi, for a while now. His most recent book is called The Ministry for the Future.
Right.
And part of what's really that book starts with an extraordinarily harrowing climate calamity. Just to warn anyone who decides to pick it up, the first half of it is pretty dark. Right. But he comes to a place through these very plausible, he's not like, it's not, nothing magical and wondrous happens, just the kinds of human systems that we're used to and the kind of organizations and bureaucracies that we have to work with, and in a sense kind of points them in, like, uses this moment of great climate calamity to tell a story about how they make the world not perfect but a whole lot better. And it's part of the reason why I think it's a really, it's a great book to read. If you're climate wonk at all, you should read it anyway, because it lives and breathes climate wonkery, and not a lot of fiction does. But it also is, there's a plausibility to it. You kind of go, that's not a crazy way to think that things could get quite a bit better after they get worse. I could quibble with him. This is way in the weeds here, but the way he, as a plot device, the way he makes things worse, I think, is actually kind of implausible. The scale of it. But in any case, I think, like, I came away from that book thinking, yeah, there's a way that this degree of upheaval leads to some very interesting opportunities. And in my own experience in the last 20 years, I've been looking at really interesting improvements to daily life that are coming about, because people have decided to take action on climate. So,
for the record, you are now the third person to recommend Ministry for the Future to me. The other one is my good friend Bernie Amel, and the other one is Hub Chair Rob Tremblay. And as far as a little more climate optimism for you, I use the online. I don't buy books anymore. I other than great books like this one that ends up being a text. got to push those books when you can. I book online through the library, and the lineup for that book was something like 50 people or something like that. And that's one of the highest that I've seen for the books that I've gone after. So there's a lot of people that are in here in Calgary that are lined up to read that book that you just recommended to me.
Well, I mean, it helps. It's also, he's a sci-fi author by trade, so it does not move slowly. It's very plot driven, and there's lots of compelling stuff happening. And yeah, I mean, I think what got me was the way he used which I mean, I guess maybe for some readers might be. I mean, it was just so much what I live and breathe every day that it just felt very familiar to me, but kind of uses the elements of large scale bureaucracy as these kind of building blocks for something better in a way that you don't, that you could actually see that happening if you have, a lot of people kind of rowing in the same direction all at once.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I will absolutely. That's another reason for you. I don't often wait for 3 people to recommend a book to me, so I am going to have to go and get this thing.
I think it was on Obama's year-end list too. So there's 4.
Oh, okay. See, there you go. There you go. Okay, so one of the great many things that the Calgary Climate Hub does to make climate discussion, awareness, and action accessible to Calgarians is to host a book club on a semi-monthly basis. And next week is the first of 2023, and will feature the very same book we've been talking about tonight, How to Be a Climate Optimist, Blueprints for a Better World by Chris Turner. So I thought I'd bring on a member of the Hub Book Club to ask a question or two on their behalf. Karen Chow, thanks for coming on tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's been great listening to Chris, and I did finish his book a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really great read, and I did come out of it feeling more optimistic. So that was a good thing. Our book club has actually already read Ministry for the Future. After a rather shocking start, it's just a fascinating read. It's a big book. Don't let it scare you, though. It is fascinating, and it paints a picture of a world that could be that is quite enticing. So the same way that Chris's book kind of promotes that there's actually a better way for us to live out there with an energy transition. So our book club meets 4 times per year. We try to pick 4 very different books written by authors of various gender and racial diversity, and really mix it up. We've, as I mentioned, we've read Ministry for the Future. We read the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle. We read Under a White Sky and The Citizen's Guide to Climate Success. And this year we're reading Chris's book, of course. And one of the other ones we have on our list is Maud Barlow's Still Hopeful: Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. And we're still looking for a 4th book. So one of the questions the book club organizers wanted me to ask you, Chris, was, do you have any other recommendations for a fiction climate book that you think our book club might benefit from reading?
One possibility is, if you want, I mean, the stuff that I tend to read fiction-wise has been in this kind of cli-fi, as it's called, which is, obviously future tense and that sort of thing. And I'm just trying to remember. It's the author is Paolo Balsigulpi, I think it's Balcigulpi. His best known book is a book called The Wind-Up Girl. Very good. But the one I liked the best, and I'm forgetting the title right now, is actually it's cli-fi set in a basically set in a sort of semi-apocalyptic southwestern United States, where water has become kind of like oil is in the Road Warrior world, where the value of water has gone off the chart. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm looking over at my shelf. Is it sitting right there, or is it on a different shelf? But I would say look at his catalog generally.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember the last name is Balcigulpi, I think.
Yeah, I could probably find him through The Wind-Up Girl.
Yeah.
Is it Shipbreaker, Chris?
No, it's not Shipbreaker, but that one's on my list too. I good. Someone spelled the name properly in the chat. Excellent.
Okay, that's great. And
No.
I
The
have
Water
another-
Knife. Someone said The Water Knife. That's the
The
book.
Water Knife.
The
Okay.
Water Knife's a great book. It's not that optimistic.
I was
But it's
just
a really great read.
I was recently in Las Vegas and went out to see Hoover Dam, and I think they're probably 75% of the way there already. So, but we did see fields and fields of solar panels on the way to Hoover Dam. So
There you go. It's both sides of the coin at once.
yeah. So I see Andrea actually posted a question, and I have a similar question about the electrical grid. Often, I'm from an engineering background, so I actually find technology quite fascinating, and I'm hopeful about technology. And often people will poo-poo solar power because they say, "Oh, the grid can't handle it." And I'm wondering, do you have kind of a concise answer to just kind of help to fight that idea that we can't do this?
So the concise answer is that the technical problems have proven solvable at all scales. And I don't mean that glibly. So the big knock or a potential knock on renewables at high levels of penetration on a grid is that they are intermittent and somewhat unpredictable, which is to say sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow. You're going to get surges at weird times. How do you manage that? And I would never suggest that was an easy thing, but it is a thing that if you go to the world's leading renewable jurisdictions, places like Germany, Denmark, there are really good engineers doing extraordinary work. And so by way of example, this isn't looking strictly at solar power, but it's the same issue. There was a very interesting, the German government and the government of its most northerly province or state, Schleswig-Holstein, did this, I can't remember if it was 12 month or 18 months, sort of technical study of how to manage the grid as renewables started to hit 70, 80, 90%. And that's already started to happen where Schleswig-Holstein has something like 75, 80% of its grid now is wind, and it feeds large scale industry in the city of Hamburg. And managing that is proving difficult, but not impossible. And so this was an opportunity for all of the stakeholders involved in this to get together and trade best practices and talk about solutions and look at, what will work. And I won't go far into the technical details, but there is a good case study on it at the Canadian Climate Institute website if you want to have a look. Basically, the sort of line, the sort of shorthand line coming out of that was that what they found was it wasn't impossible to think through technically. You could do things like create synergies between large scale energy users, big factories and industrial uses, and specific wind energy or whatever renewable installation, and figure out ways to move power back and forth when it was surging on the grid in order to meet demand and not have the thing that's currently happening, which is sometimes they have to dump power for cheap or free to other jurisdictions. They didn't run into any impossible technical hurdles. The big hurdle they ran into was realizing that the way they price energy on the grid couldn't support the kind of flexibility they needed to make this a good economic prospect. So their recommendation out of that to the governments involved was rethink the entire way you price electricity from the ground up. Whether that happens in that part of Germany or not is still a question to be answered. But I think the takeaway there is there was not a technical reason why you couldn't have that level of renewable energy on a grid and not continue to manage it and keep everyone's lights on and keep large scale users happy. These included, big, smelting and industrial steel making and those kinds of operations where you need a whole bunch of on-demand power at specific times and that sort of thing. So this is still in an age where storage is pretty expensive, and storage is just going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper, I think, and that will solve a lot of those problems as well. We're still kind of feels like we're at the spot with storage that we were with renewable energy itself 10, 15 years ago, where it had kind of proven itself technically. You can store energy all these different ways. It's just which of these is going to prove the best, cheapest, most efficient way to do it. And I think we're still in the uptake phase of that. But none of this, certainly in places where, again, as I say, you've got, I mean, there's one of the Hawaiian Islands, Kauai, now has, at times will go round the clock with nothing but solar, with storage backup. Technically, it's not unsolvable. It's just different. And it's requires a different set of engineering skills from a great big huge power plant and a whole bunch of spokes coming off of it. But again, these are not impossible technical challenges. Interestingly, in a Canadian context, we already have this. When you talk to European energy people, they're like, I can't believe you guys haven't fixed this already. There are good reasons for it, but Canada already has something like 82% of our electricity is non-emitting. Most of it's old hydro. The fact that we don't move energy from region to region, electricity region to region efficiently, is the big problem here. And it is a really big problem, not a technical problem, but a political one. All those big hydro monopolies don't want to give up selling power to the US for a lot more money than they could sell it to Alberta or whoever's, Saskatchewan next door to Manitoba or whatever else. But if we had stronger grid interties, we would be very, very close to we never even need to contemplate 50% renewables on any given grid, let alone 100. Or 50%, intermittent renewables anyway.
Okay. Well, I will be able to start.
That was a
with
lot of
my
technical
problems have a proven solutions, and there's a lot of details, and the book really did provide a lot of examples to support that. So, not always easy to convince others that it's possible. So, when I joined the Climate Hub and when I got involved in the book club, part of my reason was to get better informed, but the main reason was to figure out what can I do to make a difference. So I think by joining the Calgary Climate Hub and hopefully getting more involved now that I'm a retired person, I feel like the Climate Hub is a good vehicle to make a difference with climate. I'm wondering if you have any other suggestions. What could ordinary citizens be doing, like me?
Well, you've stolen, honestly, my first answer to that question, which is always find other people who are engaged and committed on these things and work together. More so than lots of other political, social issues, environmental issues that we face. We are so much more effective collectively than individually. Your first, like, if you are genuinely concerned about this, if there's anyone listening in right now who's not already joined the Climate Hub or other like-minded folks like that to work on these things, not only is it more effective, it's just way, way more satisfying. It's really, with climate more than a lot of things, it's really, can be really terrifying and paralyzing to try and process that on your own. So don't, join a club, come to a book club, whatever is your thing, go to a community association meeting and push for better streets in your neighborhood with better transportation options, whatever your thing is. One of the things this is one of those things that a few years ago would not have been as easy to say, but there are enough different parts of our social fabric are now engaged on this that you can find like-minded people in whatever it is. If you're really into art, there are people doing art with a climate focus or climate mind. There's no limit to that. So I would say those are, you've already answered my question, and now I have to come up with a second not as good answer. Which again, support elected officials and folks at your work or in whatever other sort of however else you spend your time who are engaged in those things in whatever way you can support them. Make decisions for yourself that make sense for yourself and try to keep climate in mind, but don't. I think part of the problem with the climate conversation is that we spent more time than was probably necessary for how much it matters on what you personally could do in your consumer choices, in what kind of stuff you buy, how you decorate your house, what kind of vehicle you drive. None of which, if it's meaningful to you, do those things. But it's so much more both important and empowering to find other people and work together on something. And so that would be, I would say that maybe so that I've said something other than what you've already said, which is join the Calgary Climate Hub. If there is a thing in the sort of political sphere that I feel gets way too little attention, it's how important, particularly in an urban environment, the sort of built-in choices we make by things like zoning and bylaws and how the city is organized. And I say this, for example, my oldest kid is involved in Fridays for Future and has done some Climate Strike Canada work as well. And one of the things I always bug them about is, you know what you guys should do? I mean, by all means, go and protest outside City Hall every week if that's what you want to do. But like one time you should all go in at once to like a zoning meeting and say, we want better density. We want, less exclusive single unit zoning in our communities.
Less sprawl.
Because that's important, and it would surprise the hell out of municipal officials if a bunch of angry climate teens came in and were like, we want better zoning. They would not see that coming, and it's hugely important. So yeah, I guess that would be if I was going to say something other than yes, find like-minded folks work together. There are some, usually the lowest hanging fruit is around efficiency stuff, and it's the least glamorous, so it gets the least attention. And things like zoning falls in the efficiency basket. It just, there was a really great, I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. It was somewhere, it was Pacific Northwest, I think it was Portland or Seattle based. Looked at the impacts of a whole bunch of different climate measures on any given neighborhood. And the thing they found by far was if you wanted to in aggregate reduce the climate footprint of the neighborhood, it was to as a handful of houses in that neighborhood fell into sort of sale and reuse, replace them with multi-unit dwellings instead of single unit dwellings. That mattered more than putting solar panels on all the houses. Just because it's like a efficiency. If you have more people living in the same neighborhood, your collective footprint gets smaller.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
That's about it for my questions.
Thank you for coming on to the show tonight, Karen, and for the great work that you're doing for the book club. I'll just say that I haven't attended a book club meeting since I think the first one, and I'm really excited to come and talk about this book, having got the chance to interview Chris. So I'm really excited for our next book club meet, which is next Wednesday. Correct me if I'm wrong, Karen.
Yes, Wednesday, March 8th at 7 p.m.
Excellent. And if we haven't given you enough reasons to become a Calgary Climate Hub member, you do have to be a member to come and join this incredibly cool book club. So consider joining the membership. The onboarding link is in the chat. I have one more question for you, Chris. I know I told you I'd keep you here for an hour. We're a little bit over. I hope you don't mind taking one more from us.
No, we can keep going. I actually, for some reason, when I wrote down how long it was, I had an hour and a half anyway.
Oh, perfect.
So
okay,
if we want to go to 8:30, we can.
All right, fair enough. Well, the question I have here actually comes to me from, I would say, a champion within our organization. Her name is Pamela. I was hoping she'd come on and ask it, but she responded to me in an email when I let her know about the show. And so I'm just going to read the question to her. I would have ended up asking you something along these lines anyways, but here's what she's saying, which is, what role do you see for climate advocacy organizations, given that the energy transition is well underway and cannot be stopped? And then even more specifically, what role do you see for the hub going forward as this transition speeds up?
I would say, the role is broadly similar, which is the more people pushing for more change faster, the better it's going to go. That's sort of what, I don't discount the urgency factor. I'm fundamentally optimistic because I think we're going in the right direction and that the transition is accelerating now. But the faster we go, the better shot we have at, doing, hitting a marginally lower, global mean temperature before it levels off, and every single one of those little increments matters enormously.
Yeah.
And on top of that, for the people engaged in this kind of stuff, the more encouragement they have, the more energy they're going to have to keep pushing in the directions that they are, whether it's in politics or the business sphere or in the consumer landscape. It's a battle that I fundamentally feel like we're winning, but that doesn't mean that we can kind of let up. And I don't think that's. I mean, I think people jump on bandwagons. They don't, as they're accelerating, they don't decide to get off. So I'm not terribly worried about that, but I think that's. I mean, we've now got a really good bunch of solutions. We can still do better. There will be a lot of really, really bad ideas run out along the good ones that climate advocates can. I was at an event a few months ago that was hosted by the Mars Discovery District, and the folks there were doing a good job. This just happened to be the panel I was involved with. Sorting out what is actually a reasonable carbon credit from one that's complete junk.
Right.
Those sorts of things. There's going to be a lot of anytime you have the kind of huge public spending that we're talking about doing in the next 10-15 years, you can push a lot of that money in really bad directions if there's not someone keeping an eye on where it's going. All of these are, I mean, nothing has diminished in the role for the people who are engaged in climate advocacy. If I were to say one thing they could, and I don't like to generalize, I know it's a very diverse group, but there tends to be understandably a hesitancy to start really celebrating the fact that we're winning. And I think that that's a piece that's missing from the conversation. And it tends, I think, to come from this fear that if you start telling people that it's solved, they'll stop caring. But I don't think that's an actual worry. I think people are going to get more and more excited about the fact that we're fixing a generational scale problem in front of our very eyes. And more than that, I think it really helps rally the troops you've got and more to the cause to say, hey, we're not cowering before big oil, we're beating.
Yeah. One of the answers that I, in reading Pamela's question, one of the answers that occurred to me is that a city council is a small number of people with an enormous amount of responsibility and enormous potential impact on our transition as a city. And they really do need our help. A lot of times we end up just, shaking our fists at city council about things we don't like. I really see the role of the Calgary Climate Hub as helping to spot the sorts of solutions that you've been covering for 20 years and say, hey, look, this is perfect for Calgary, and this is going to save us money, and this is going to be better because of this. And, if we're able to do that, then we're able to move the ball. And as an organization, here's another reason to become a member of the Calgary Climate Hub. I've seen us move the ball, and we're going to keep moving that ball.
Before you move away from that, one of the things, because this was, I mean, one of the first things I did, in trying to get engaged politically myself was work on civic issues and helping to form a group that had some good results. The politicians involved at municipal level, the city councilors mainly, only hear from a very select number of people. You need people who have the sort of time and energy and wherewithal and organization to show up when that issue is being heard before council. That means that the handful of people that show up have a disproportionate amount of influence on the kind of mood of the room in some ways. And the cranks who don't want anything to change always show up. You can guarantee if there is a proposal to bring bike lanes to a new part of Calgary, the people who hate that idea and want to block it forever are going to be there. But if there are more of the people who want to see more bike lanes in Calgary show up at the same meeting, which is kind of thing something like the Calgary Climate Hub could help work on, that has real power. It has power in ways, which is not to say don't be engaged on federal political level, but it's kind of hard to have that level of shouting in the ear of the decision makers at a federal level.
Yeah, well, so the Calgary Climate Hub is laser focused on municipal level, and for folks who may not be familiar, that this is where you can actually see the fruits of your climate action come into being. You can actually make change happen and point to it and say, hey, I was there for that. I helped make that happen. And so in that spirit, I wonder if, is there something that you would like to see a movement with the Calgary Climate Hub trying to influence city council on? Perhaps one of the solutions that you've seen in your last 20 years where you just feel like, oh, come on, this is perfect for Calgary.
Yeah, I mean, some of those things are already in motion. I mean, I thought, taking some really good steps to create more complete communities and bring more modes of transport to people. I feel like those things are in motion, but they could certainly use a lot more defenders. There is still extraordinary amount of sort of inertial energy in the direction of expanding at the periphery of the city rather than making the communities that we already have more dense and multi-use and functional. Those debates are ongoing constantly. That happens at a sort of permit by permit, area plan by area plan kind of level. And those that it's always there's always pushback. The status quo in the city is still very much toward low density single use development at the periphery. So keeping those issues on the agenda in a whole bunch of different ways is extremely important. I think one of the things coming out of the pandemic that's discouraging, understandable, but discouraging, is that transit is kind of being neglected at the moment on a whole number of fronts. The quality of the service, the issues, some issues of safety on the transit lines themselves. As we, it looks like pretty fundamentally rethink the whole hub and spoke idea of a city. That requires some more nimble planning on the parts of the people who make transit decisions. So I think there's a really great opportunity for people in transit's an absolute backbone of any sustainable city. And this is not to say it's a one size fits all, they must do more now. It's more like, is there anyone engaging, city councils right now on what makes the most sense as the city changes? I mean, I know some of those conversations are happening internally, but having a little bit of pressure from citizens to say, just because there's not as many commuters during rush hour on the hub and spoke lines doesn't mean people don't value transit in the city anymore.
Right. Well, the man is Chris Turner. The book is How to Be a Climate Optimist, Blueprints for a Better World. Thanks so much for coming on, Chris.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for choosing the book for your book club. It was a great conversation.
You bet. I want to just mention our book club panelist mentioned that she was a senior, and I just want to say that within the Calgary Climate Hub we have a group called the Eco Elders, and they are a group of seniors, and I'll tell you, this group punches over their weight all the time. They're very impressive, and I feel like seniors are some of the people that are really able to get in there and do the work, and they show up too, and so I'm really, really always grateful to the Eco Elders in the Calgary Climate Hub. I want to thank all the volunteers that helped make this happen. I want to thank the Hub board for giving me the opportunity to talk to great authors and thought leaders like Chris Turner, and I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in, whether it be tonight or on our social networks later on. I would encourage you to consider donating to the Calgary Climate Hub. If we were at a hall someplace, maybe there's a hat out somewhere, or we're passing a bucket around or what have you, and maybe you chip in a few bucks. And if that's something that you're able to do, you can go to the Calgary Climate Hub website and donate there very easily. Again, I urge you to consider becoming a member. It's a game-changing thing in your life. It helps get you organized and finding something that you really feel activates you in the act you're trying to do. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks again to everybody, and let's keep up the good work. And hey, what's the matter with a little bit of optimism? We may actually be winning this thing. Thanks again, Chris.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.